It's July 4, 1969, 9:45 p.m., a warm summer evening in Vallejo, California. The sound of fireworks and laughter filled the air, but the tranquility was shattered by the sound of a gunshot. A 16-year-old girl named Darlene Ferrin was lying face down on the ground, mortally wounded. Her boyfriend, Michael Mageau, was lying beside her, also shot and bleeding heavily. The scene was chaotic as people screamed and ran for cover. The area was dimly lit, with only a few streetlights illuminating the deserted parking lot. A small, cramped space, no more than a few hundred feet square, with a few cars parked and trash scattered about. A single, fading parking light cast an eerie glow on the bodies of Ferrin and Mageau. A pool of blood was spreading rapidly from Ferrin's head, while Mageau's shirt was soaked in his own blood. The smell of gunpowder hung in the air, a stark reminder of the violence that had just occurred. In this moment, the Zodiac Killer was just feet away, still holding his gun and surveying the damage he had done. His face was obscured by the darkness, but his eyes gleamed with a sinister intensity. He was a tall, slender figure, dressed in dark clothing and a ski mask. His presence seemed to grow larger in the minds of those who saw him, as if he was a monster come to life. He took a few deep breaths, his chest rising and falling with a sense of satisfaction. Witnesses claimed to have seen a figure fleeing the scene on foot, heading in the direction of the nearby highway. They described him as being around 5 feet 10 inches with a medium build and a distinctive way of walking. Some even remembered a peculiar accent, unlike anything they had ever heard before. They recalled a fleeting glimpse of a car being driven away from the scene, but it was too fast for them to get a license plate number. Their accounts vary, but one thing remains clear: this killer left a trail of terror behind him. Before we go further, hit subscribe and the bell. We post new cases every single day. This channel is dedicated to exploring some of the darkest corners of human history. From infamous serial killers to shocking crimes that made headlines around the world. We dive deep into the investigations, the evidence, and the theories surrounding some of the most compelling cases out there. Join us as we uncover the truth behind the Zodiac Killer. Let me take you back to the very beginning of this story, a time of social upheaval and cultural change. It's the late 1960s, and the world is on the cusp of a major shift. The civil rights movement is gaining momentum, the Vietnam War is raging on, and the counterculture is in full swing. In this climate of chaos and uncertainty, a series of gruesome murders would take place in Northern California. These attacks would leave a trail of death and destruction in their wake, and would ultimately become known as the work of the Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac Killer's identity remains one of the most enduring unsolved mysteries in American true crime history. Over 7 decades have passed since the first attack, but the identity of this elusive figure remains a closely guarded secret. Despite numerous investigations and leads, the killer's true name has never been revealed. Their motives, their methods, and their true identity continue to haunt the public imagination. The case of the Zodiac Killer is a complex web of crime scene evidence, cryptic messages, and suspicious characters, which we will untangle over the next few episodes. The case of the Zodiac Killer centers around a man named Arthur Lee Allen, a 32-year-old resident of Vallejo, California, who would later become a prime suspect in the investigation. Born on January 18, 1933, Allen grew up in a seemingly ordinary suburban family, with a father who worked as an insurance salesman and a mother who was a homemaker. He lived with his parents in a modest home on the outskirts of town, where he spent most of his free time playing with his friends and tinkering with machinery. Allen was described as a shy and introverted individual, often preferring the company of his own inventions to that of his peers. As he entered adulthood, Allen struggled to find stable employment, drifting from one low-paying job to the next. Arthur Lee Allen's daily life was marked by a series of mundane routines, as he worked as a mechanic at a local garage and spent his evenings tinkering with his own projects in his makeshift workshop. He lived with his parents, who provided him with a comfortable home life, but Alan's relationship with his family was strained, particularly with his father, who he felt was overly controlling. Despite his awkward nature, Alan had a few close friends, with whom he would often spend his free time hunting and fishing in the nearby woods. As a mechanic, Alan had a practical and resourceful side, which served him well in his personal projects, but also gave him a sense of satisfaction that he struggled to find in his work. Alan's personality was a complex mix of introversion and resourcefulness, making him both relatable and infuriating to those who knew him. Arthur Lee Allen's likable and relatable qualities often served to mask his darker tendencies, as he was a master manipulator who knew just how to present himself to others. His family and friends remembered him as a friendly and affable person, always willing to lend a helping hand, but beneath this facade lay a more sinister individual. Alan's charm was rooted in his ability to connect with others, often using humor and wit to deflect attention away from his own flaws and failings. Despite his checkered past, Alan was able to present himself as a reformed individual, eager to start a new life and leave his troubles behind. As he navigated the complexities of adulthood, Alan found himself drawn to others who were struggling to find their place in the world. Arthur Lee Allen's relationships were marked by a complex web of trust and deception, as he often used his wit and charm to manipulate those around him. He was particularly close to a few close friends, with whom he would share his innermost thoughts and feelings, but these relationships were also often tinged with a sense of obligation and guilt. Alan's parents, while well-meaning, struggled to understand their son's motivations and behaviors, often finding themselves exasperated by his antics. As Alan entered adulthood, he began to form new relationships, some of which would prove pivotal in the events that were to unfold. But little did anyone know, the months leading up to 1968 would prove to be a turning point for Alan, a time when the calm before the storm would give way to chaos and destruction, leaving a trail of death and violence in its wake. It was a crisp autumn evening on July 4, 1969, in Vallejo, California, a city about 30 miles northeast of San Francisco. The sun had just set, casting a warm orange glow over the streets. The temperature was in the mid-60s, a pleasant evening to be out and about, but for David Faraday, 17, and Betty Lou Jensen, 16, it would be a night they would never forget. They were on a date, parked at a remote Lover's Lane spot near Blue Rock Springs Park, the music playing softly in the background. The only sound was the distant hum of a cricket's chirping. The events that led up to this fateful night began when David and Betty Lou decided to go on a date. They met up with friends at a drive-in movie, but as the night wore on, they decided to sneak away and be alone. They parked their car at Blue Rock Springs Park, a popular spot for young couples, and spent some time talking and getting to know each other. But as the night wore on, someone else appeared on the scene. This person was lurking in the shadows, watching the young couple with a sinister intent. As David and Betty Lou sat in their car, parked in a secluded area of the park, they were suddenly ambushed by a gunman. The killer, armed with a pistol, approached their car and opened fire. David was hit in the head and chest, while Betty Lou was shot in the head. The killer then turned and ran, leaving the two teenagers to bleed out in the car. The sound of gunshots echoed through the night, but no one was around to hear them. The killer had carefully planned the crime, ensuring that they were alone. The most shocking detail of this crime was the postcard the killer sent to the Vallejo Times-Herald, claiming responsibility for the murder. The card was sent just hours after the shooting, and it read, "Dear Editor, I am the one they call the Zodiac. I am the one who killed the most people in the Bay Area." The killer's brazen act of sending a postcard to the newspaper would be the first of many clues left behind. This would be the first time the public would hear of the Zodiac Killer's existence. The world would be left wondering who this person was and what their motives were. The Zodiac Killer was about to embark on a killing spree that would leave the nation in shock and terror. It would be a chilling series of events that would unfold over the coming years. What do you think really happened on that fateful night? Comment below, Was the Zodiac Killer a calculating predator or a desperate individual driven by madness? The investigation began on December 20, 1968, when the police received a cryptic letter from the Zodiac Killer, claiming responsibility for the gruesome murders of David Faraday, Betty Lou Jensen, Michael Mageau, and Darlene Ferrin. The killer's first letter contained a cryptic code that would become a hallmark of future communications. The police were immediately alerted to the possibility of a serial killer on the loose. Detectives were dispatched to the scene of the crimes to start processing evidence and interviewing witnesses. The investigation was still in its early stages, but the police knew they had a serious situation on their hands. The key piece of evidence that changed everything was a letter sent to the San Francisco Chronicle on July 31, 1969. The letter contained a cryptic message, along with a piece of the victim's blood-soaked clothing. This was the first time the police had concrete evidence that tied the Zodiac Killer to a specific crime. The letter also contained a cipher that the police were unable to crack at the time. However, the presence of the blood-soaked clothing was a major breakthrough in the case. The police had several main suspects during the investigation, but none of them were ever convicted of the crimes. One of the most popular suspects was Arthur Lee Allen, a convicted child molester who matched the description of the Zodiac Killer. Allen was investigated for years, but he was never charged with the crimes. Another suspect was Richard Gaikowski, a journalist who was known for his dark sense of humor. He was also investigated for years, but the police were unable to link him to the crimes. The police were led on a wild goose chase by a suspect named Richard Gaikowski's editor, Paul Avery's notes about the case. Avery believed that Gaikowski's editor was the real Zodiac Killer, and Avery's notes seemed to match up with some of the crimes. The police investigated Gaikowski's editor for months, only to find out that he was not the killer. This was a major setback for the police, as it wasted months of valuable time and resources. Ladies and gentlemen, buckle up for the shocking finale of our true crime series, because today we're about to uncover the twist that nobody predicted in the infamous Zodiac Killer case. After decades of investigation and countless theories, it's time to reveal the game-changing revelation that will leave you speechless. The Zodiac Killer, known for his gruesome murders and cryptic letters, sent police a series of codes and ciphers, leading them on a wild goose chase. However, in 2018, a team of experts cracked the code, and the news was met with a mix of excitement and skepticism. But little did they know that this breakthrough was just the tip of the iceberg. As it turns out, the code that was cracked by the experts didn't lead them to the killer's identity, but rather to a cryptic message that hinted at a surprising connection to the 1966 Lake Berryessa attack, one of the Zodiac Killer's earliest known crimes. The code was actually a warning to the killer's next victim, a message that seemed to point to a specific location. Police and experts alike were stunned by this revelation, as it seemed to suggest that the Zodiac Killer was not just a random attacker, but rather a calculating and meticulous individual who planned his crimes with precision. This twist raised more questions than answers, and it left the investigation wide open for further review. The code, it seemed, was not just a puzzle to be solved, but a message that held the key to the killer's true identity. After months of re-examining the case files and re-interviewing witnesses, the investigators came to a verdict: the Zodiac Killer remains one of the most infamous unsolved serial killer cases in American history. Despite the breakthrough, the killer's identity remains a mystery, and the case remains a cold one. While some continue to speculate about the killer's true identity, others are convinced that the killer may have been a mastermind who deliberately left behind a trail of misinformation. As the investigation continues to unfold, one thing is certain: the Zodiac Killer's case will continue to captivate and terrify us for generations to come. The legacy of this killer continues to